This tutorial is going to be walking you through how to create different geometric designs on top of one of your images. These designs could be different symbols or just simple lines and shapes, as long as they're in some way reinforcing whichever idea that you're trying to communicate. Starting out, again, the first step is to duplicate the background layer. So I'm going to hit duplicate layer and then OK. That way I always have that copy to go back to. And then I'm going to add a new layer. That way when I'm drawing, I have my drawing on top of a separate layer instead of just my background copy. What I'm going to be doing to create geometric shapes is using this lasso tool, which is the third from the top in the panels in the tool panel. I'm going to click on that lasso tool, and this is what I'm going to be using to draw and create my shapes with. I'm going to start out and zoom in a little bit closer on my image here just so that I can kind of see where I'm drawing my shapes and what they look like a little bit better. And I'm going to pick an area to start out with. So I'm going to start out and just draw some different shapes around the eye. So I'm going to follow, using my lasso tool, the contour of the eye here and create a shape. So I'm going to connect my lines, and now I have a selection right now of an area. And I can fill this selection in with either just an outline or a color if I want it. So I'm going to fill this in with a color. I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool, which is this right here, and I'm going to click on that. If for some reason you have the gradient tool that comes up instead of the paint bucket, if you click and hold down on that icon, the paint bucket tool will come up for you. So you can select that and then double click on your color to choose which color you want to fill with. I'm going to use a light purple color here, and I'm just going to hover my paint bucket tool over my selection and click, and that's going to fill in that shape. So if I hold down Command and hit D on my keyboard for deselect, it's going to deselect my lasso tool selection there, and you can see just the shape by itself. So I'm going to go around and add more shapes. So I'm using my lasso tool here. And maybe this time I'll create more of a triangular shape here. So I'm going to create that shape. Again, go to my paint bucket and fill that in with a color that I want. I went through and added a couple more shapes to the face here. And one effect that you can do to these shapes is maybe put an outline around them to make them look a little bit more complete. So to add a background to these shapes, what I'm going to do is in my layers panel, I'm going to double click on the layer that I drew those shapes on, and it's going to come up with these different effects for my shapes. I'm going to go down to where it says stroke, and I'm going to click on that button, and you can see that automatically you can preview what it's going to look like on your actual picture. So right now I have that stroke or border around my image. If I wanted to change the color so it's not completely a black stroke, maybe I want a darker purple color, I can choose that and then hit OK. And you'll see that darker purple color updates instead of the black. Another interesting effect you can put on these shapes that you draw is maybe a drop shadow. So I'm going to go down to where it says drop shadow at the very bottom and select that. Over here you can change the angle that your shadow is at, and then the distance as well. So the distance is going to create a little bit more of a shadow. And this could be an interesting effect on your image. So I'm going to hit OK. And then from there, I might start to go back in and add more detail to my shapes. So maybe I want to use a different line or texture in between my shapes to connect them. So to do that, I'm just going to use my paintbrush tool. Just like what we did for creating the different sketches on top of your image. And I'm going to choose a color that I want to work with, so I'm just going to use black for now. And I might go back in and add just some different lines or designs on top of this. So maybe I'll add some lines connecting these shapes. And you can see how since I have these lines drawn on the same layer, they're creating a drop shadow as well. However, if you don't want that drop shadow to show up, I would put these lines on a different layer if you're going back in and adding different lines. So to undo or go back, holding down Command and Option at the same time, I'm hitting Z, and that's undoing my lines. Then I might add a new layer to draw those lines on, so you're not going to get that drop shadow effect. So they're just going to be lines here. So if you wanted to create different lines and designs without filling in your shape, just using the paintbrush would probably be the most efficient way to do that. Here's an example of more designs that were added to the face, so you can kind of see an idea of the direction we're headed with these geometric shapes and designs. I would definitely, for this practice image, try and add a little bit more, so maybe some designs in the background or in the hair, maybe a little bit of lines on the neck. But for now, here's a nice example of some different shapes and different colors you can use to fill them in with. Just a couple of other effects that you can go about adding. If you wanted your colors to maybe fade or your shapes to fade into the picture a little bit more, instead of the opacity of that layer being set at 100, you can take that opacity down a little bit, so maybe set at 60% or so, and those colors are going to start to fade into the picture and blend a little bit more, so it might not be as obvious, but still gives you a little bit of an effect on top of the face. After you finish adding all of these different geometric shapes and drawings on top of your image, if you want to practice using actual geometric shapes that are already preset and created, if you go into your tool panel on the left and click where this rectangle is, you're able to see some different shapes that you can create. So maybe you want to create a rounded rectangle to fill in. So I'm going to click OK, and you can see that little rectangle there. You can maybe make it larger. I would put it on its own layer so that you can work with that image on its own layer instead of having the drop shadow and the opacity changed for it. So that's something you can kind of play around with as well as you're practicing. It's just using some of these different geometric shapes and adding those to your photo as well. Once you're finished with your practice image, make sure that you save it as a JPEG and turn into Classroom for points.